The drama surrounding Angel Reese's departure from the Chicago Sky is not simply a story about a trade. It is a story about a franchise reaching its breaking point, a young star who confused marketability with maturity, and an organization that ultimately decided the cost of keeping her was higher than the cost of letting her go for almost nothing. What unfolded over the course of 2 seasons in Chicago was a slow unraveling. A sequence of incidents that individually might have been forgivable, but collectively painted a portrait of someone who was never truly invested in being part of something bigger than herself. It began with a suspension that most casual fans dismissed as a minor footnote. In September, Reese sat down with the Chicago Tribune and publicly declared that the Sky needed to go out and acquire great players, framing it as a non-negotiable condition for her future with the franchise. The sentiment itself was not outrageous. Chicago did have roster limitations, but the method was everything. She did not raise these concerns in a private conversation with the front office. She did not pull a coach aside or request a closed-door meeting with management. She walked straight to the press and essentially placed the entire organization on public trial, telling the world that the people surrounding her were not good enough. The teammates who read those words the next morning, who showed up to practice knowing their own colleague had just told every reporter in the league that they were inadequate, had to make a choice about how to respond to that energy. Most of them chose silence. But silence in a locker room is rarely neutral. Chicago suspended her for half a game and attached for words to the decision that carried enormous weight inside the league. Detrimental to the team. Those are not words an organization uses casually. That is legal documentation language, the kind of phrasing a front office deploys when it is constructing a paper trail, when it is preparing for a longer conversation that ends with someone no longer being on the roster. When the second half of that game came around and Reese reportedly refused to check back in, the fracture that had been developing quietly for months became impossible to ignore. She then refused to suit up for the remainder of the season entirely, a decision that told every person inside that building exactly where her loyalty ended. The teammate situations that followed made the trade feel less like a business decision and more like an inevitability. Courtney Vanderloot, a 2-time WNBA champion and 5-time All-Star, had chosen to return to Chicago at 36 years old after winning another ring with the New York Liberty. She left a championship-caliber situation because she believed in what the Sky were constructing. Then she tore her ACL 7 games into the 2025 season. In any functional locker room, the response to a veteran going down with that kind of injury follows an unwritten code of dignity and respect. Reese chose a different path. In that same September interview, she told reporters publicly that the team could not rely on Vanderloot to come back at her age and that Chicago needed someone younger and more capable of competing for a championship. Those words landed on a 36-year-old woman sitting at home rehabbing one of the most painful injuries in professional sports. A woman who had given her career to that franchise and returned out of genuine loyalty. The relationship was described by multiple sources inside the organization as damaged beyond any realistic hope of repair. Then there was Camila Cardoso, her frontcourt partner and fellow member of the 2024 draft class. The two were supposed to be the foundation Chicago built its next era around. Instead, the pairing became statistically one of the worst defensive combinations in the league across 2 consecutive seasons. But the numbers were almost secondary to what was happening beneath the surface. Sources inside the building described Cardoso as having distanced herself from Reese to the point where the tension was affecting the entire team's atmosphere. There is a clip from a game against New York where Cardoso visibly drifted away from her own team's huddle, walking toward the opposing bench as if she had mentally already left the building. The image became a joke online, but the reality behind it was far more serious. When you push your own frontcourt partner to that level of visible disengagement, the problem is not chemistry or fit. The problem is a pattern, and that pattern had followed Reese from college to the professional level without interruption. The rivalry with Caitlin Clark added another layer of complexity that Reese could never seem to navigate without escalating. Multiple on-court incidents across the 2024 and 2025 seasons were flagged by the league, and each time the footage told a story that contradicted the narrative Reese offered publicly afterward. When the 2025 season opener against Indiana produced offsetting technical fouls, what followed was Reese framing the encounter through a lens that her own teammates reportedly found jarring and disconnected from what they had witnessed on the floor. The look on the faces of players standing around her in that moment told a story about internal credibility that no press conference could walk back. Inside the locker room, whatever trust had survived to that point took another serious hit by the time the back injury absences began accumulating in the final stretch of the season. The front office had already made its decision emotionally. The timing of those missed games lined up almost perfectly with periods of internal accountability conversations within the organization. And when footage surfaced of Reese on a private jet heading to Las Vegas while her team was fighting for positioning, the whispers became something much louder. The injury may well have been real. Back problems are genuinely unpredictable, but optics carry their own weight. And what those images communicated to teammates grinding through their own pain just to be available was a message no rehabilitation timeline could explain away. Chicago ultimately traded her for 2 late first-round picks that will not arrive until 2027 and 2028 in a 15-team league. That return is functionally a bargain clearance price for a 23-year-old who led the league in rebounding in both of her professional seasons. The fact that the organization accepted that return without hesitation tells you more about the situation than any official statement ever could. And in choosing to move forward with Cardoso as the cornerstone of their rebuild, Chicago delivered a verdict on character, chemistry, and coachability that the rebounding numbers could not override. Atlanta now holds the asset, and the jersey sold out within an hour at $130 a unit. Ticket prices for Dream Home games surged overnight. The marketplace responded with the kind of enthusiasm that only a handful of players in the entire sport can generate. The Angel Reese effect on revenue and visibility is completely real, and nobody in the league disputes it. But Atlanta is not just inheriting a marketing engine. They are inheriting every dynamic, every pattern, and every tendency that made Chicago desperate enough to accept loose change for a stat sheet marvel. The question is not whether Reese can produce in Atlanta. The question is whether Atlanta becomes the environment that finally channels all of that intensity productively, or whether the same friction finds new surfaces to scratch against in a new city. What do you think happens next? Does Angel Reese finally find the right environment in Atlanta, or does history repeat itself in a different uniform? Is this a redemption story waiting to happen, or has the pattern already told us everything we need to know? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because this conversation is far from over. If you want more breakdowns like this covering the stories behind the stories in women's basketball, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss what drops next.